Okay, so I'm pretty sure that I talked about WA4 a little bit last week, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about the American or the Great Literacy Crisis, which comes from NCAL, which I want to talk about a little bit too. Um, well, this a group of educators came together with the idea of creating an archive where writers would be able to put different types of documents in together in order to, well, just kind of put have different types of writing that incorporate different media and really challenge the notion of what literacy is and what writing is and that sort of thing. Well, that was brought to Texas A&M Commerce in officially fall of 2008. In fact, I was the graduate assistant that really headed that up. It's part of the reason why I know quite a bit about the archives. And so basically, you have all these different assignments and different media or projects that people did that all, answer the argument of who is a writer, what do you write, how do you write, those sorts of things. Depending on how much searching you did on the website, there's actually a list of questions that you could potentially give that you could potentially use for an interview, that sort of thing, which you were supposed to do for this week. Actually, you're supposed to have them last week. So basically, by Friday of this week, you must have all of your writing interviews in to me and their permissions. So if you're not sure what that means, send me an email and I will tell you again what exactly that means. Anyway, the for the Great American Literacy Crisis, or the not the Great American, but the literacy crisis, is the idea that they're afraid that the average student will be unable to write. I've actually seen a copy of the article. It's kind of interesting because it talks about how, particularly if you look at there's a picture, and it's like an upper middle or an upper to middle class student who is unable to write, and some of the writing examples that they give are partly taken out of context, and there's just research that is not exactly founded, but they're they were afraid that people weren't going to know how to read and write, and if they didn't know how to read and write, how are they going to function in society? Remember chapter 2 of Elements of Literacy, either chapter 2, I believe, or chapter 1, where it talks about how if you are literate, you'll have a better life, that sort of thing. That's kind of what they were thinking. Anyway, your job is to figure out whether you agree with them anymore. Do you think that people are illiterate? What does illiteracy mean in this whole idea of what literacy is? In fact, that is what your extra credit is. For 5 points towards your either your participation grade or your journal grade, whichever you need it on more. You can write a journal entry that talks about what you think illiteracy means and why. And let me rephrase that by saying up to 5 points. Just because you do it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm just going to give you credit. You have to put thought into it and that sort of thing, because that's something you really need to think about as you're working through these interviews. So you'll have until Sunday to do that, Sunday midnight, and it'll be up to 5, maybe even up to 10, depending on how generous I'm feeling at the time towards whichever grade you choose. Speaking of grades, remember that those are midterm grades. You still have a half a semester to get those grades up if you're not happy with them. For the participation grade and the journal grade, those are set in stone. You can't change those, but you can revise your papers. Those of you who have started doing revisions, I will try to get those back to you after I grade your WA3s. You know who you are. And I encourage you to continue revising because your major writing assignments, because the more you revise, generally your grade goes up. There have been a few instances while teaching where they've gone down, but revision is where you take the comments that I've given you and you really work with them. And for some of you, I may recommend going to the writing center. We have an online writing center, and you can send, once you've worked on your revisions, you can send your paper to them and get some help with that, all part of the revision process. So be thinking about that. As far as the Great Literacy Crisis, do you agree with them? Do you think people don't know how to write anymore? Do you think people don't read anymore? What does illiteracy mean? You might find that might be helpful in your paper. You're also going to want to use the interviews that you've done, and I want to make this clear that sometimes you don't have to disagree, or that you can disagree with someone and still put that in your paper. It doesn't have to be like, I agree with everything they say, because you're not going to agree with everything they say. And so that's something that I want you to think about as well. And hopefully you are getting those done. So, as always, email me if you have any questions. Wasn't entirely sure what needed to be addressed as far as what to talk about with WA4. The other video for this week is going to talk about peer review, its importance, and some of the logistics that you'll need to know as you're doing that process. So, to the next video.